what it means to rise in consciousness. I'm going to assume, for the purpose of this video, that everyone listening has used graph coordinates in a math class. So you're familiar with X being the horizontal plane for coordinates and Y being the vertical plane for coordinates. You, as the human being, exist on the X or horizontal plane. This means that you experience life in a linear manner. Everything we perceive is linear, from our time to our days to years, right down to our very lives. And we never think much about it. However, because you are also I am, you are also experiencing life on the vertical plane or the Y plane. How is that possible? Because of your imagination. When you imagine what you want, or even what you don't want, your I am consciousness is having that favorable or unfavorable experience on that vertical or Y plane, the imaginal plane. So to rise in consciousness means that you are having experiences, visceral experiences in imagination. And because you are source, you have the ability to choose what kind of experiences you're going to entertain in consciousness. In my last video, I mentioned that awareness is your biggest currency when it comes to the law of assumption. And I stand by that because before I was this person talking to you fine people, I was someone who briefly resided in the world of advertising and marketing. And although it was a very brief stint for me, one thing was made very clear. And that was that you needed to grab and hold on to someone's attention. And doing so was gold. And not only that, because of the rise in social media, this meant that the job needed to be done. It had to be done in about roughly 10 seconds. That's not very long. So we are so accustomed to dividing our attention amidst the world, and everything is trying to grab at us. In the United States, where I live, politics is a very hot topic right now. And I'm not going to get into where you fall because that is irrelevant. But that would segue easily into, for example, everybody talking about the rising cost of just about everything here. That also segues into the job market, which segues into healthcare. You get what I'm saying? It's a rabbit hole that has many little rooms that you can easily fall into if you're just living, if you're just existing day to day and you're not becoming aware of what I'm sharing with you, what other channels like mine are sharing with you. But when you start to awaken to the truth of who you really are, you begin to start seeing past these 3D distractions. And as you continue to rise in consciousness by putting your currency, aka your awareness, on the kind of life you want to experience, and you remain there unmoving, nothing that is happening outside of you is going to have much of an effect on you. Now, that is not to say that you see something, hear something, experience something in your 3D world that you don't like necessarily. But at the end of the day, are you going to continue to remain with your awareness focused on that? Or would you rather pivot and put it on what you want? And I'm saying, for your own sake, If what you want is very important to you, then put your awareness on that, whatever it may be. Now, notice that whatever you give attention to in your life, that begins to expand. And another word for expand in this case is it's being made manifest, or it's solidifying into matter, which eventually becomes a part of your 3D experience, becomes something tangible. These days, for instance, the word narcissist gets tossed around like if it were confetti. And I understand that there are some people who might exhibit more self-involving behaviors than others. And I'm not labeling that as good or bad. I'm just using it for this example. But I also choose to look at that as that particular person's expression as source. That's it. And you, as the observer, can choose to see it differently, can choose to turn the other cheek, as in take your awareness off of that perception and see it differently. And I would strongly suggest to anyone listening to me that whatever you see being outpictured in 3D right now that you don't like, you begin giving it the meaning that although you don't know how, the human you does not know how, things are actually turning around in your favor. Reality is going to catch up and conform to that assumption or to any other assumption, which is why not choose a more favorable assumption than a non-favorable one? Use this law to your benefit. Use it to your favor, not against yourself, because it works both ways. If you continue listening to people who call someone else by a certain name, whatever it may be, you're essentially, maybe even without meaning to, without intending to, but you're sending your I am awareness there. And because I am is impartial, you will have more experiences where the same kind of people enter your life. And then you wonder why you keep meeting the same kind of people. It wasn't life. And it's not bad luck either. It was you as source calling it into being by placing your awareness, your I am awareness there. That's all. At any point in time, you can choose to focus elsewhere. And if you are feeling unsatisfied with your life at the moment, then I strongly, strongly urge you to consider my words. If you're depressed or worse, stop this video, click off this video right now, go and get help right away from a professional. But if you are feeling mostly just overall dissatisfaction with your life, with the way that your reality looks right now, I'm here to tell you both the good and the bad news. The bad news is, I'm sorry that you're here. But the good news is, and this is way more important, is that you are the only person that can change that. And how do you do that? By going within or by rising in consciousness. Now, I'm going to give you an example, a personal example that I did in my own life back in the day before I was familiar with the law of assumption, before I had really studied Neville Goddard, Reverend Ike, Dr. Joseph Murphy. Those are like my go-to guys. That's like my law of assumption triad of goodness. But back then I had no idea what I was doing, and it worked for me anyway. And I didn't know it until I started studying these principles, and I began using reverse engineering to look at my own life, to look at what I had called into being for myself with the least amount of effort. There was no efforting involved. And so some time ago, I had been working a job that I no longer liked and I wasn't happy with. And at the time, I had no idea what I was doing, but now in hindsight, I know exactly what I did and how I did it. I rose in consciousness. Now, the reasons for me not liking the job were, number one, it didn't pay very much. The salary was barely able to sustain my livelihood, as in I could pay for my home, my utilities, and daycare for my child, but there was barely anything left over for food, and forget about doing any sort of leisurely activity. That was out of the question. And also, since I was working Monday through Friday, that meant that my weekends existed only for me to be able to catch up on the things that I did not have time to do during the week because I was working. Things such as shopping for groceries, doing the laundry, planning my meals, cleaning and tidying my home, that sort of thing. And back then, I also had a baby. So now there was also an extra human being that I was responsible for. And at the time, I just felt like I was a hamster on a wheel. And the more that I tried to solve my problem as a human, i.e., I was trying to find another job that would pay me more so that I could at least relax a little bit, I soon came to realize that it would only be a matter of time before I outgrew the better paying job's salary because that's what happens, right? And how many people do we know now that live this way? It's a lot of people living like this. And because I did, and I did it for many years, I didn't know how I was going to get out of that situation other than to look for work elsewhere. So what ended up happening is I was so not feeling my job, I'll just say that at the time, that I would take naps, little short naps, like cat naps after eating my lunch. And I would probably go into a very relaxed, drowsy state. Neville Goddard refers to this as SATS, S-A-T-S, or a state akin to sleep. And oftentimes these were no longer than 20, 30 minutes max, okay? And as I would let my body relax and I would close my eyes and shut out what was happening around me in 3D, it was completely into my mind, into my consciousness, and I would just ask myself, how would it feel if I were home right now? How would it feel if I were with my baby and all of my needs were met? If my bills were paid, laundry was clean, dry, and put away, food was prepared and was only awaiting to be reheated, to then be consumed, how would I feel about all of that? And despite everything that I was facing back then, I and my former partner, we were also in a heavy amount of debt. We had this new baby. We also had bought a new home, had the mortgage. We had 2 vehicles that we were paying off. And I told myself, okay, so yeah, this is what's happening out here. But what if it were possible for me to be able to quit my job and be home with my child? Would I enjoy that without worrying about the bills? And the answer that I got was a resounding solid yes, because in my heart of hearts, that's what I wanted. That was my desire then. So what I was doing back then unknowingly was I was rising in consciousness. Although my physical body, my human self, was very much in 3D on that X plane, I was only able to continue to try coming up with a solution to my problem, a solution that I could only perceive through my human self while being on that horizontal X plane. But the answer wasn't there. It was never going to be there. I couldn't find it there. And so I let myself drift off, and unknowingly, again, I sent my I am consciousness to the Y plane, to the vertical plane, to imagination, where that version of me, that version of my I am, was happily a stay-at-home mother. Guess what happened? As I continued doing this, and all the while, mind you, I didn't stop. So I was, I'll own up, I'll fess up to it. I was wavering because I didn't know. I truly didn't know yet what I was doing and what my power was. And so I continued to try finding another job. I was looking. My former partner and I, we were also continuing to pay off our debts. And we started to notice that we were getting very close to paying off one of the vehicles. And we decided that once that vehicle was paid off, that then I could possibly quit my job and that he would find a second job, essentially, to cover the remaining expenses. But the human me, thought, well, since that vehicle is going to be paid off in another 2-3 paychecks, and, my job isn't so bad right now. I mean, it's not ideal and I don't love it, but maybe I'll just keep on working and we'll just continue paying off the rest of the debt. But then something else, several things else, I'll be honest, happened in 3D. I got some personal news relating to my family that would change the ability for me to continue working full-time in this position or in any position. But I also got into a very small, very minor, really, altercation with a supervisor in my department. And rather than be fired, because that's what it seemed at the time to be, the situation seemed like I was being set up to be fired. Instead of being fired, I quit. I gave them my notice, and a couple of weeks later, I was home with my child. And I was also happily making my family's life easier by doing all of the necessary things during the hours that I was formerly at my job. Formerly, not formally, formerly. So in this situation, because I had sent my I am unknowingly to that reality, that timeline, I was compelled, and the people around me were compelled. We were all compelled to play out our roles perfectly. Because once you send I am consciousness, your I am consciousness somewhere, I am doesn't return unto you void. I am goes to prepare a place for you so that where I am is there you, the human you, shall be also. And that's from the Gospel of John, by the way, chapter 14, verse 3. Thank you for being here today. I'll talk to you again in the next video.